I was annoyed by the summer cabin. I understand that's an odd thing to say, but it's accurate. We would spend at least a week there each year, and sometimes we would even go up there for vacations. One year, we spent Christmas in the cabin, and it was a terrible experience. The cabin was my family's vacation home on the shores of Lake Erie, a modest two-bedroom cabin with a loft up in the eaves. It had a little kitchen, a beautiful living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms downstairs, one for each of my 2 sisters and one for me. Since Mom and Dad always slept in the loft, they were unaware of the oddity I saw from my bed in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. Large gaps between the floorboards on the cabin's floor allowed for a view of the interior. Dad kept saying he would repair the floorboards, but he never did. I guess Dad decided it was worth the occasional spider or bug looking up through the floorboards if his socks didn't get hung on protruding wood because they were smooth, ancient wood that didn't splinter. Bugs, spiders, and other pests were the least of my concerns. I didn't notice it at first, of course. The first time we stayed at the cabin, I was just amazed. Everything was great to have a cabin to ourselves, and I checked everything out from top to bottom before going outside. I spent hours swimming in the lake, removing our canoes, climbing trees, and playing pretend before falling asleep deeply after supper. I'm not even convinced that I dreamed that first night, but I couldn't wait to do it all over again the following day. However, during that first week, I started to notice strange noises coming from beneath the flooring. The scuffling sound, which seemed to come from anything moving underneath, made me think of small animals or insects. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of them between the crevices in the boards, but they were always too fast for me to notice. According to Dad, it was most likely just rats because many of these old cottages had rodents dwelling under the floorboard. He placed traps in the kitchen so that if they were only living under the house, they wouldn't be disturbed. But nothing ever got past the traps, and Dad wrote them off as good-natured insects. Except for me, everyone appeared to be well behaved. I never slept like I did the first night again, and sometimes the scuffling under the boards kept me up at night. As I lay there listening to their movements, I would assume that they were much too big to be mice. If they were rats, they were huge rats, and sometimes I thought they may try to get through the flooring. We always had a fantastic time there, but I prayed every night that I would go to sleep before I was awakened by the scratching noises. My parents bought the house when I was 4 years old, and we went there every year until I was 12. There was plenty of time for me to listen, to investigate the sounds, and to lie awake in terror. We spent 2 weeks in the house when a storm knocked out the electricity when I was 10. After the flooding caused the grid to fall down and the entire town lost electricity, my parents decided to stay there until things calmed. It was awful. Every night, I just laid there and listened to the scrabbling of whatever was underneath. No matter how many cushions I placed on my head, how much I swam and ran, or how fatigued I got, nothing ever helped me fall asleep. I finally had enough of the scrambling and clawing that kept me awake at night after 8 nights in a row. Around 11 o'clock, the scratching started up again, and I growled. I was tired and grumpy because I had had enough. I pushed myself out of bed and landed hard on the boards, then stomped about as loudly as I could to scare them. I stomped around for a few minutes before the noise under my boots suddenly stopped. I stood there feeling pleased of myself and got back into bed. If I had known it would be that easy, I would have finished it weeks ago. I closed my eyes and finally drifted off to something like sleep, but it was only for a brief minute, and for the first time since that first night I felt safe. I heard the scrabbling again after hardly an hour had passed. The sound was so loud that I assumed something was trying to get in through the floor. I looked over the side of the bed and saw something squeezing between the cracks. It was hard to tell because it was dark, but I thought I saw fingers digging up and through the holes in the woods. Despite the dirty fingers and the dark liquid the wood made them run with as it chopped, it kept pushing. I was immobilized by fear, my 10-year-old brain not knowing what to do, but I knew that the floors would groan if I did nothing. Reaching to the edge of my bed with a shaking hand, I found the baseball bat I had leaned on. I had been preparing because baseball tryouts were coming up, but I had not expected to use it for this. I leaned over and swung the hand as hard as I could. Though it didn't stop right away, it pulled its fingers back under the boards after a couple more powerful shots. I hoped they were broken, but they probably were, so I waited for them to come back while I held the bat. I sat there staring at the floor for a time, watching while something worse than a finger gazed back at me. It looked very human and had one bloodshot eye. I looked at the bat, and it clattered on the floor as I drew back into bed. My parents came right away when I yelled. I tried to explain what I had seen to them, but they just thought I was dreaming. They finally allowed me to sleep with them in the loft, and I remained there until we departed for our homes. I was never left alone in the room, not even during the day, and I wasn't bothered at that moment either. But then I saw that wild eye again and heard all those fingers fumbling. We didn't go back the next year because Dad couldn't get the time off approved or something, and I tried to avoid the week-long trip they planned when I was 12. I still periodically had nightmares about those fingers and eyes, and I didn't want to return. I was old enough to be independent at 12, and I think I could have been if my sister hadn't tried to do the same. I had assured her that she could take my room, but she refused. Mom was adamant that we would all enjoy going and that none of us would be staying at home. I grabbed my bat and a torch, and during the second week of July we set out for the lake cottage. I tried my hardest to be completely exhausted the first day. I spent hours swimming, hiking, and exploring before dozing off at the dinner table as darkness fell. Since I was tired, I reasoned that if I didn't annoy them, they would leave me alone. By the time it was time to go to bed, I had fallen onto the tiny mattress and was out before my head hit the pillow all the way. I thought I might have finally broken the pattern as I fell asleep, that I had managed to fall asleep before the itching started. When I was awakened in the early hours by the scratching, I sat up, cursed, and slapped my pillow. It was louder than it had been. Peering over the edge of the bed, I could see something moving beneath the boards, and it made a sound like animal claws, like nails on a chalkboard. I thought I was having nightmares again when its fingers began to stab through the wooden slats. Again, it was pressuring. It strained at the boards, bending and distorting them till I thought it may break through the floor at any second. Several of the fingers were bent oddly, and the tips seemed to have healed after being broken, so I was prepared to give them something to heal from when I picked up the bat again. I tried to tear those fingers free as the eye came back to glare at me, but they dragged them back in as the blood ran down. It was bloodshot and awful, and it slid away from me when I hit the floor planks. I tried to fall asleep again, but couldn't. Every creak in the house, every whine of the wood, every scrape of a tree branch, and every rustle of the wind all sounded like the scraping returning. I finally fell asleep, but it was almost dawn when I woke up, and I was tired and sleepy. I felt scratchy for the rest of the day. When my mother asked if I was feeling sick, I told her I was okay. Later, though, I did take a nap. I wanted to give it my all when it came back that night, but I got more than I bargained for. As I sat in the middle of my bed, unable to sleep, I heard a scrabbling that I had never heard before. A thousand-fingered creature seemed to be scuttling down there, driving its nails in as it went. Several fingers fumbled at the wood as the planks began to bulge and shake. I was unable to catch them all when they began to puncture the wood. I swung my bat repeatedly, smashing fingers and breaking nails, but it felt like there was an army beneath the floorboard. I kept hitting them, and their fingers snapped audibly, but the wood was starting to rise. I screamed for everyone, not just for myself, and as they started to press up and come into the room, I caught a glimpse of what was underneath. When I tried to scream, it became stuck in my throat. I had no idea what to think when I saw the eyes looking up from the floor. I first believed it to be rodents, and then I believed it to be a single individual. People were trying to get in and out of the area under the floor, all naked and skeletal. As they tried to pry up more boards, I counted 4, 5, maybe 6, and their numbers kept growing. Which number was under the floor? My flesh crawled at the idea of so many half-starved humans packed beneath our summer home. I noticed ants coming down a hill. When I heard thunderous footsteps coming toward my chamber, I believed there might have been a dozen of them. Then the door suddenly opened, allowing the hall light to enter. They looked up as I did, and when they saw him, their eyes widened in amazement. In addition to being shocked, I felt hopeful since someone had at last saved my life. When Dad saw what was underneath the floor, he stopped saying, "What in the hell are you?" They saw him too and tried to break through the floor, but he didn't give them any time. He came in, grabbed me, and left, closing the door and laying a chair under it from the hallway. After that, he called the police, woke up my sisters, and led us all to the loft. Then he sat up there with a pistol, which I didn't know he had until that particular time, while he waited for the cops to come or for some of the people from the floor to come out. When the cops came, he went down to let them in and came back to keep us safe. That's how my dad was always a guardian. Our claim was somewhat corroborated by the pushed-up boards, but the cops discovered nothing. When I told them how long it had been going on and what I had heard and seen, they searched beneath the house and in the nearby woods before giving up. Although they found nothing, they did discover a screen that had been jimmied open on the back side of the house and other signs that something was moving below it. Dad apparently heard a story from the sheriff who came out to check things out, but he didn't tell me until I was older. The lake house was so cheap that working stiffs like my parents could afford it since it was the site of a terrible incident. The former owners, a man, a woman, and 3 children, suddenly disappeared and were never found. Despite searching everywhere, they were unable to find their hair or hide. All they found was that there were enough pushed-up boards in the space I currently occupy to accommodate a small group of people. We then bought a timeshare in North Carolina when my parents sold the lake house. I still dream sometimes about the people that lived under that cabin, even though it was 10 years ago. If you find a cottage for sale on Lake Air, do your homework and proceed with utmost caution. There must be more than termites in the foundation. You are likely familiar with the sensation of discovering that your children have viewed something improper or frightening without your awareness in this day and age. For this reason, I don't allow my children, boy 4, daughter 6, to visit YouTube unattended. Every few days after school, though, I let them check out any movie they want from our neighborhood library. Since the only library in my little rural Wisconsin town has a pitiful selection of mostly children's films, I feel rather confident that they won't find anything frightening or violent there. My daughter chose to watch Dora the Explorer on Friday. I was shocked to discover that the DVD had no colorful print when I opened it at home. When the theme song began and Dora and Diego were seen racing around, I stayed to make sure it was Dora because it was a simple black color and I was worried it was a different DVD in the wrong box. After that, I went to make dinner. My kid began to scream and appeared hungry, but I was too busy trying to figure out what my daughter was talking about when she repeated telling him over the weekend that she was looking forward to seeing him trip and making a clawing motion with her hands that looked like a Venus flytrap. She claimed to have seen it on Dora when I asked her why. When I questioned what she saw, she replied that it was the metal mouth on the ground. I let it go and prepared him some food after my son's cries became so loud that I believed his vocal cords could break. We returned to the library the following Friday, and I suggested that they choose a family-friendly film to watch. We went back to Dora after my son chose Finding Nemo. After having trouble using the scanner, the elderly woman behind the desk went to the closet to use a backup scanner. My son was furious because my daughter continued making the hand motion while she was away. I discovered that the Finding Nemo DVD was blank once more when I opened it. This time, it had the standard tan/beige color of unprinted CDs. Although it was very different from what I recall, it was indeed Finding Nemo. Some of the topics must have been too complex for me to understand as a child. Because Nemo was the only one who survived, Marlin appeared to harbor a great deal of bitterness toward him. In several situations, his rage bordered on abuse. There were also scenes of the young girl from the dental office aggressively attempting to hurt, electrocute, choke, and torment the fish, making her appear much more nasty. Additionally, the voices sounded a little strange, but that might just be my memory. Is it just me, or do I have a serious problem with this library? I'm concerned that my children are seeing inappropriate content. All right. Change or update. I asked my kid what she saw when she watched Dora the other day because I was genuinely afraid and felt like I was going mad. She claimed that Dora's key had been taken by the fox figure known as Swiper, as usual, and that she had used one of those metal mouths to restrain the fox. Her response to my question about what she meant by metal mouth was, "You know, like in the backyard." I discovered that we have a section of the fence with fox traps because we have some outdoor pets, such as hens and rabbits. My kid informed me that the Swiper was bleeding from its teeth after becoming lodged in the metal mouth. Dora didn't mean to hurt him, she just wanted to recoup all the swiping he had done, she stated. In order to watch Dora on DVD, I returned to the library. I checked the Dora and Nemo DVDs at the library, and neither one was blank. They were just regular fucking DVDs with vibrant character printing. All of the fucking DVDs were normal when I went through them. I went to borrow Dora, Nemo, and another Barbie that they had seen a long time ago. After taking them, The woman behind the desk leaned over to grab stickers that indicated the due date. She spent a weird amount of time searching for stickers after taking the DVDs down with her. I opened them when I arrived at my car, but they were all blank. Even though they were perfectly normal when I checked at the library, they were all blank white DVDs. I loaded them into my laptop one at a time and quickly looked through them. The one about Finding Nemo appeared to be the same as the one we had previously seen. In the Dora one, a swiper was shown perish in a fox trap. Additionally, the Barbie one depicted Barbie as hostile and envious. She poisoned a rival ballerina Barbie in one scenario, and it shows her gasping, spluttering, and vomiting. I returned to the library and asked the woman at the front desk if she may go check out the children's area. I excused her by saying that there was a book on the floor that had been puked on. After she departed, I looked under the desk and discovered the real DVDs of the films I had just purchased. I made the decision to enter the storage cupboard behind her workstation. There were boxes within. A crate was filled to overflowing with blank DVDs when I opened it. Let me briefly explain the backdrop before I begin the story. I was staying at a lovely cottage in Ontario. It was a part of a tiny community with 12 cottages total, all of which were organized in a semicircle around a lovely park with big trees, a little playground, and a picnic area. The cottages were close to a beautiful lake where people could swim, fish, and canoe. During our stay, my older brother and I became friends with a kid named Brandon who was about 14 years old. Brandon had a habit of wandering off on his own and preferred hanging out with us rather than being with his family. As a young kid, I couldn't understand why someone wouldn't want to be close to their parents. Maybe it was because I was a bit of a goody-goody. When I was younger, I always did what my parents told me, always following the rules and try stay out of trouble. And honestly, I do not like Brandon much as he was a bit of a troublemaker, but he was a good friend of my brother, and since I looked up to my brother so much, I would follow him everywhere. Even if it meant hanging out with Brandon, I wanted to do everything my brother did because I thought he was the coolest person in the world. Eventually, Brandon got the idea to sneak out, and of course my brother tagged along since we shared a room. I had no choice but to join them. At first, we simply wandered over to the park and hung out there for a while, enjoying the quiet night and the cool breeze rustling through the trees. But soon we all felt bored and wanted to do something more exciting, so I suggested we call it a night and head to bed. But the older kids were the ones making decisions. Reluctantly, we set out into the woods with only Brandon's phone's faint glow to guide us. Fortunately, the woods weren't too dense, and after a short walk, I wanted to return, but I had two options: stay with them or walk back alone in the dark. Brandon suggested that we explore the woods, and despite my attempts to argue against it, they simply ignored me. I eventually noticed that there were no longer any crickets, owls, or even a breeze in the woods. When I brought this up, we all stopped and listened. After a few seconds of total silence, my brother spoke up, sounding irritated. I told him I was trying to listen, but I was confused and told him I didn't make any noise. He then mentioned the heavy breathing, likening it to a dying pig, and told me to keep quiet. Just as I was about to argue, I heard the breathing too. It was heavy and sounded difficult. I whispered, "That's not me. I can hear it too." My brother looked at me, and then the breathing got louder as if it was getting excited. Above us there were two lights. They glowed brightly in a brilliant blue hue, swinging gently from side to side. We were all fixated on them, unable to tear our eyes away, almost as if we were under a spell. Suddenly a chilling moan pierced the air, sending shivers down our spines. It sounded like someone who had smoked for years struggling to let out a scream while desperately gasping for air. And we started running. We could hear branches breaking and trees shaking behind us. Whatever it was, it seemed to be in the trees. I cannot run too fast, mostly because of my small feet, so I knew I couldn't keep it up for long. Soon pain shot through my legs and I had to stop, while my brother and Brandon kept running ahead, leaving me behind. Still, that thing, whatever it was getting closer fast, so I dove into a bush nearby, but luck wasn't on my side because it turned out to be a thorn bush. Within seconds, I was covered in cuts and scratches. Yes, I had to bite my lip to stop myself from crying out in pain. As I sat there trying to stay quiet, I heard something heavy land on the forest floor nearby. From my hiding spot in the bush, I saw the two lights from before shining into the small clearing where I was, but these weren't lights, they were eyes. Those eyes revealed a creature that seemed like it came from a scary dream. It was about 7 foot tall, skinny, and its skin was a dark gray color. Its arms were really long with claws at the end. It stood there for a long time, searching around, trying to find me. I stayed hidden in that bush for hours, not daring to move until I saw the sun rising fully above the horizon. Then I mustered all my strength and ran in the direction I assumed the cabin was there, and I didn't care that I was bleeding heavily or that my clothes were ripped to pieces by the thorn bush. I ignored the burning feeling in my legs as I ran through the forest for what seemed like an eternity, and then I stumbled onto a busy highway. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed with beeping machines and worried faces. Apparently, someone had seen me leaving the woods in tea and pajamas and had called for help, but when I tried to explain what had happened, no one believed me. When I persisted, everyone assumed I was just dreaming since I had been in the woods for too long. My brother eventually returned home and waited until daylight to tell me what had transpired, at which point a search party was formed before they were called to come retrieve me. Since those horrifying events occurred more than 7 long years ago, I have devoted numerous hours to searching the internet in vain for any information that could lead me to that enigmatic. This occurred around 2 years before the pandemic, when I was experiencing mental health issues and a strained connection with my parents. As a result, I frequently felt isolated and misunderstood, which made things much more difficult to manage. A good friend of mine, who I had also gone on a couple of dates with, has left the city. We had been close, and losing him like that was a shock. I remember feeling numb and empty, unable to process the loss. Eventually, I started having terrible dreams. Although I can't remember everything that happened in all of them, there was one thing that was always the same: the room or whatever place I was in would get darker and darker. All my dreams are from my point of view, so it felt like a weird dark haze was creeping into my vision. But it was even worse than that. The entire room would go dark, like that scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf gets mad at Bilbo and everything suddenly darkens. That's the best way I can describe it. But in my dream it felt even darker and heavier. Then I would start to feel a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach along with complete terror, even though I couldn't see anything else and nothing had happened yet. Then, if there were people in my dream before, they would suddenly vanish when the darkness came, or in an instant they'd all start staring at me with blank, lifeless faces. Now, having a bad dream, if the people hadn't vanished, they would have been staring at me. But this happened every single time without fail. Then, if you've ever had your arm or leg fall asleep and experienced that weird pins and needles feeling, it's similar, but worse, and it gets heavier as it goes on. It feels like something is holding me tightly, squeezing me so hard that it's crushing me. It feels like it's choking me at times, like it's focusing on my throat. I feel like I'm surrounded by darkness, and I frequently hear a loud buzzing noise in my head that makes it difficult to think, impossible to talk, and completely impossible to fight against it. Eventually, I manage to break free and force myself to wake up, but the fear doesn't always stop there. Sometimes, I'd stay awake for an hour or two, unable to fall back asleep because if I tried to go back to sleep, the dream would just resume where it left off, and whatever was causing the cussing would just keep doing it. In 2021, I ended up living with my best friend, Amelia, who has a small cabin in the country. She is very religious and an all-around wonderful, amazing person. It had been more than a month since I had last had one of those dreams, and this time it was like being thrown into a movie without knowing what's happening. Everything happened quickly, leaving no time to figure out what was going on. I remember clearly stumbling out of the cabin, jumping into my Jeep, and speeding down the dark back roads where I lived before. I nearly lost control of the car a few times, but I kept going fast while desperately calling Amelia on my phone. I slept upstairs in the cabin on a tiny mattress one night while Amelia was away babysitting overnight, as she frequently did for another friend. I informed her I was driving with trepidation. I went to the hospital because I felt really ill and knew that something terrible was going to happen. She asked me what was wrong, but her voice began to wane. Instead, I heard a low, ominous, growling voice whispering strange words into my ear that I couldn't even make out were coming from the phone. I looked at the dashboard's rearview mirror, but then the terrifying part of my dream began. Suddenly, my Jeep's headlights went out, and I was unable to turn them back on, so my vision was beginning to blur. But then, for the first time in my dream, a large hand reached through my hair at the back of my head. It was so large that it felt like the palm could easily cover the back of my head near my neck, but its fingers still touched my forehead, and I could feel claws lightly scratching my skin. The hand then grabbed a handful of my hair at the back of my head, pulling me back firmly until I was pressed hard against the car seat. The growl grew louder and louder, and I felt like something heavy was pressing down on me. I was so frightened that I was screaming silently. I spoke to Amelia about these dreams, and she taught me the Lord's Prayer and advised me to ask God to send the Holy Spirit and Saint Michael to protect me. I had never done this before, but I remember pleading with God in my head for assistance, promising that if He helped me defeat this thing and make it go away, I would believe in Him forever. As soon as I called out to God, the hold on my hair began to loosen. My mouth was wide open, but nothing was coming out. Whatever it was, I knew it truly hated me. I felt as though this thing was letting me go, but it was happening slowly, as if it didn't want to. Eventually, I woke up completely, sat up quickly, and looked toward the loft stairs and window. It was the first time I had ever seen it outside of my dreams in real life. Since there was no light in the cabin and I remembered that I was on the second floor, I knew that the two red eyes staring at me from the chimney window belonged to that thing. They had large red slashes, and even the whites of its eyes were red. I couldn't see any other details, other than its oddly shaped head, but the fact that it was staring at me from a second-story window with no trees or air conditioners nearby indicated that whatever it was. I immediately called Amelia and pleaded with her to stay on the phone with me while I explained the dream and what had happened. Fortunately, her friend was home, so Amelia could begin returning home. She instructed me to put her on speakerphone and prayed loudly for me, even telling me to burn some white sage. After that night, I started going to church with Amelia, and we would pray together frequently. I even made up a prayer to say before bed every night, and as long as I say it, I no longer have those dreams. I haven't seen that thing or felt its presence since then, and I moved into a new apartment alone, but I still stay in touch with Amelia and pray every night. I understand that some people may think I'm crazy or that I can't believe that thing was a demon, but I have to tell them that when you're truly dealing with something negative, something that wants to hurt you terribly and wants you to know it's terrible, you simply know.